Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name's Patrick Sieg. I'm the president of the Rockville Art League, and I know many of you, nearly all of you on this call. Thank you again. Our membership year goes from September 1st till August 31st. So in this case, it started a few days ago. It will go on until August 31st, 2026. So please join. Without you, we can't have shows, we can't have speakers, including Irina. We can't support the arts in our community without your membership. Thank you so much in advance, and a good number of you have already joined and renewed. So thank you. Next quick thing, I was so glad to see so many of our members well represented in the shows throughout the area on Labor Day. It was great, and I'm so proud of you guys. You guys are wonderful artists, and I'd like to think that while you may be members of different art organizations, I am too, I'm so proud that our artists seem to be the best ones in these shows, and yes, I'm biased. Next thing, there is a new show up in the Glenview Mansion Art Gallery. It's called Han-Mi, and excuse me. It is a Golden Jubilee art exhibition for that group. It's a group of Korean American artists. They're from the DC area and also New York. They're all professionals. They have a very unique perspective. It's a nice mix between representational and abstract. It's beautiful. It's up until October 3rd. So please do yourself a favor and go over and visit and see that show. And it looks great. Lisa did another fantastic job of arranging the art for the city of Rockville. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Irina Stotland. I am so glad that she is continuing the tradition of helping us kick off new membership years. And this is the 9th September in a row that she has spoken to us as our first speaker of the year. Thank you for doing that. She also supported us in other opportunities. One year we had 2 art history presentations, which was great. She was a judge for one of our juried shows. And she's just a big supporter, and we're so glad that we met her. By the way, Lisa and I first met her more than 9 years ago, taking one of her courses over at Montgomery College. And she's great on Zoom. She's great in person. She's just great. She studied and got her doctorate in art history from Bryn Mawr. She speaks at least 3 languages, probably more. At least 3 of them fluently, maybe 4 fluently. She'll correct me if I'm wrong. She is a recognized expert on the art and life of Paul Gauguin. But more importantly, she's just a wonderful and interesting and fun person to listen to. So, Irina, I can't build you up anymore, and it's all heartfelt and it's all true. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's not true, but thank you. All right, share. Let's see. All right, let me write this. Okay, if you see a black box on the side, that's fine. It's the way I think I see your faces, which I appreciate, but I think some people see a black box on the right side. Okay, so the lecture is going to be about 70 minutes. I have 35 slides. Usually it takes about 2 minutes to go through each slide. Please let me know if you can't hear me. You should mute yourself because usually people have background noises. I do appreciate when I see your faces though, so if you can stay, the picture of your face would be nice. I think Patrick and Lisa prefer that you write your questions into the chat. But after I finish talking, you can unmute yourself and ask me questions as well, okay? But just, we're gonna do the lecture first, just to manage time a little bit more efficiently. So today's lecture is on Romanticism. The loss of reason produces monsters, which is a quote from a Goya's print that people, even if you don't know that it's by Goya, you have probably seen it. You can see it now in the right upper corner here, and we're going to talk about it a little later. So the period of Romanticism in art dates from 1800 to 1850, so about 50 years, which is a fairly substantial amount of time, duration-wise. And we can trace the beginnings of Romantic thought, the beginning of that. It's not just an artistic movement, it is also a philosophical movement, sort of a social shift. So we can trace it back to the writings of Goethe in Germany and to Germany in general, to the writings of Germaine de Stael, and then really historically, the sort of breaking point was the French Revolution. So the French Revolution, the Great French Revolution, is 1789 to 1799. And after that, we have a period of Napoleonic conquest, right? Napoleon Bonaparte in power. So from the beginning of the French Revolution up until 1815, we have this period of upheaval in Europe, of violence, of death, and not just death as in people being killed, but also the death of the Enlightenment sort of utopia, imagined utopia of reason. And we're going to talk about this. So Romanticism is truly, if you want to define it, is a counter-Enlightenment movement. It is the disappointed 19th century humanity that doesn't see itself as a sort of a bearer of reason anymore. It's sort of people in Europe, because of all of these wars and chaos and blood, despair of trying to comprehend the world through reason, through rationality, and withdraw into themselves and start to see the world, start to structure their perception of the world through the prism of an individual experience of the world. So emotionally, right? Not through reason. So if you no longer believe that reason can solve the world's problems, right? And the only thing you can do is to experience it personally, what follows from that is the loss of an idea that there is one absolute truth. So the sort of the truths fragment into subjective emotional responses. So there are no conventions anymore that work for everybody. There are no absolutes. There is no one objective truth. And the sort of the demands, the external demands that an Enlightenment citizen would answer to, like the demands of the church, the demands of the state, right? The demand of the public opinions, they no longer matter. What matters is your individual truth, right? This is sort of like postmodernism, your subjectivity, and anything that is outside of the society is no longer seen as weird, but is starting to be seen as heroic, as visionary. So the loners, the marginalized, they become the focal point of Romanticism. So the thing to understand about Romanticism, the way to understand Romantic art is you have to understand the concept of the sublime. The word sublime means something that exceeds human comprehension, that exceeds reason, exceeds rationality. It is beyond, right? Beyond our puny human minds. So emotions like awe, or wonder, or terror, or passion, these are the sublime emotions. And this is what Romanticism is fascinated with. Since we're talking about individuality for Romanticism, there is no one style. There is a wide range of style. Each one is individual to the individual artist, because what is valued is, most of all, is originality and invention. And it's not about mimetic reproduction of reality. It is about idiosyncrasies. Now, what are the subjects that the Romantics are interested in? The past, which is usually idealized past, pastoral past. Nature becomes very popular as a subject matter because you can romanticize nature versus the industrialized modernity. And nature, that is, so you have the pastoral past and pastoral nature, and then you have the uncontrollable nature. So that is the nature of the storms, of the floods, the catastrophes of nature, that is sublime. So the past is sublime, the storms are sublime, and also the sort of smaller nature, or perhaps larger nature, the nature of humanity, the internal nature that controls us, not the reason, but it is the madness, or it is the despair, or it is the loneliness. That becomes the subject matter for Romantics. So we're going to look at Francisco de Goya, J.M.W. Turner, John Constable, Theodore Géricault, and Eugène Delacroix. So Goya is where you have the emerging anti-hero. The romantic landscape of Turner and Constable, very different romantic landscape artists. And then the romantic history painters, Géricault and Delacroix, we're going to look at. Okay, so this is Francisco José de Goya Lucientes, which we just say Goya, and we understand who that is. He's a Spanish artist. He lives a long life. He is 82 when he dies. And he is a son of a craft work gilder. So not really a high sort of socially established artist. He started studying art at 14. He studies with the neoclassical painter by the name of Anton Mengs. He enrolls at the academy in 1763. He travels to Rome, and then he gets established in Madrid. And he becomes part of the sort of intellectual milieu of the time. This is 1780s. And the milieu of the time is the Enlightenment. They all want to modernize Spain. There's still a functioning Inquisition in the 18th century. They want to do away with the superstition, with the belief in witches and demons and all of those things. They want to urbanize and bring Spain into the industrial age, sort of. Kind of on the brink there. So he is named the court painter to the Spanish king, and then the French Revolution happens. Once the French Revolution happens, all the monarchies in Europe get very scared, right? Because the French royal couple actually physically lost their heads. So the Enlightenment becomes very censored in terms of the ideas, suppressed, and a lot of the friends in Goya circles get imprisoned or exiled. And then he is very, very sick, and he becomes deaf. We don't know what's wrong with him, actually. There's no diagnosis. But he is very depressed. He lost his hearing, and his paintings change, and they become much, much more dark and despairing. He is then, so he recuperates for about 6 months. He's then made the director of the Royal Academy, which is the highest, really the highest job you can get at the time. But he has to resign it because he is not healthy. He is not able to juggle all of these administrative duties and paint. But he is made, even though he's sick, he is made the prime court painter. This is 1799. Just 8 years later, 1807, Spain is invaded by Napoleon. This is the start of the Peninsular War by Napoleon, and there is a lot of dead people in Spain. There are revolts, there is war, there is despair. So a complete sort of catastrophic fragmentation of the Enlightenment structure, that we can make the world better by reason, by education, by enlightenment. None of that comes to pass. So this is what Goya paints, this sort of crash, this disappointment of what drove him in his youth. The most interesting thing I find, and what you should pay attention to when you look at Goya, is how he paints bodies, because human bodies are at the center of the Enlightenment, and they're also at the center of the Romanticism. But they're different bodies. So during neoclassicism, which is associated with the Enlightenment, you have these ideal bodies, right? Heroic bodies. Think about David, this sort of heroes of civic virtue, right? Neoclassical bodies, muscular, strong, powerful. The anti-Enlightenment body, the romantic body, is much less idealized. It's much more animalistic. It's much more impulsive. And in Goya, and he's looking at somebody like Hieronymus Bosch. In Goya, a human body very frequently becomes a hybrid. It's this sort of demonic monster. So this is, on the right, you're going to look at it, it's Goya's Saturn devouring his son. So this is a human body that has lost its reason, that has descended not just into madness, but into its base animalistic urges. So this grotesque body, this hybrid body, Victor Hugo famously said, the grotesque is on the reverse of the sublime. So it is another type of the sublime, the negative sublime. So this is one of the earlier, well, not earlier, but sort of the beginning of the Depression for Goya. This is A Yard with Lunatics, 1794. Now, the only artist who was famous for painting the insane asylum prior to Goya was William Hogarth. And this is the period of Rococo in Britain. And madness was seen as a sin, right? So you go mad because of your sinful nature. God punishes you. But Goya approaches it from his own mental sort of issues, and he says, raving with the mood that I myself cannot stand, I work to occupy my imagination, tormented as it is by contemplation of my sufferings. And these are not commissioned works. This is his sort of smaller, uncommissioned, but very dark images. And he said, because they're not commissioned, he doesn't have to answer to any external demands. He's painting out of his subjective, individual point of darkness. He says they offered him the scope for fantasy and invention. And as you can see here, it's animalistic, a lot of them missing clothes, the mark of the civilization, right? Their bodies without reason, their bodies without minds, as anti-enlightenment as you can get, really. And it's about his fear of insanity. And of course, there is no treatment for madness in the 18th century or the 19th century even. It's just isolation in an asylum. So some of them are shackled, all of them are enclosed. They're prisoners within that. All we see is a corner of this very dark, sort of bare world space. And then you have this light, which doesn't bring hope, but is more sort of blinding erasure, right? Rather than illumination. There is no enlightenment. The light doesn't help. The light actually doesn't reach the bottom of madness, as you can see here. So this is the space of unreason, as Goya sees it. And then we have his really famous series of prints, 80 prints, called Los Caprichos, or the Caprices, right? The fantasies. And these are etchings on paper, and Goya is an incredible craftsman, an incredible etcher. So the plate that I'm showing you every plate has a title. So Los Caprichos is the title of the album. This is Capriccio number 43. The dream of reason produces monsters. And it was supposed to be the cover of the album, and the full title would have read Dreams, the First Universal Language. Now, he has to look out for the Inquisition. The prints some of them are fairly anti-clerical. So the titles are very vague, very imprecise. So when you look at it, when you zoom in and look at this image, what you see is a new direction in art. You see, this is a self-portrait of an artist, of Goya, sitting at his table with the tools of his trade, and he has fallen asleep and he's beset by nightmares. And all of these nightmares are from the Spanish folklore, right? The lynx, the owls, the bats, they're all sort of evil creatures of evil. Now, what is interesting here is that the sleep of reason produces monsters. You can interpret it in two ways. The absence of intellect, right? The absence of the application of rationality produces monsters, right? Like the absence of restraint, for example, giving into your urges. Or is it that the reason had become so complacent, the period of enlightenment has become so satisfied with itself, that it missed the point at which it descended into dictatorship, like the reign of terror of the French Revolution, like the usurpation of the Republican power by Napoleon, who crowned himself emperor. So it could go both ways here. Now, another thing to see here, goes back to the point about the bodies, is that this idea of the world upside down, the world as an inversion, the world as a carnival, right, where things are crazy, where things are upside down, starts with Hieronymus Bosch in art. And it's associated with the popular, whereas the neoclassical body and the neoclassical world is associated with an ideal, right, with the reasonable. So just to show you more examples of his caprichos, I'm showing you 4 here. So it's all about monstrous beings and delusions and, scary fantasies. So some of them are sequential. So here you have 2 peasants carrying the nobility, who are presented to us as donkeys, which is dark enough, I think, right? But then in the next image, which is the continuation of the first, the peasants have been turned into donkeys, and the aristocracy has turned into monsters. So the peasants no longer have any dignity left, and neither do the aristocrats. It's just more and more monstrous as time goes on. And then you have, here is the pretty teacher. So you have the younger witch and the older witch. And here is don't scream stupid. And this is anti-clerical because that's a friar, a caricature of a friar over here. And the point of this is that the true goblins, the true nightmares, that the people who should be our shepherds, right, who should be our leaders, like the aristocracy or the clergy, and they are the ones abusing us. A very sort of, critical, socially critical commentary here by Goya. Now, the most famous paintings by Goya, the most famous painting, I should say, is this one, the 3rd of May. So there is a revolt of the Spaniards against the French, and both, that revolt is put down very brutally by the Napoleonic army. So this is the 3rd of May, 1808. That is the title, but it is painted in 1814. So what you see here is, after the revolt, the first painting, the Spaniards were rounded up and shot in different places in Madrid. So what you can see here is the line of the victims, some of them already dead, murdered, some of them waiting for their fate. You have a church in the background, and they have this hopeless black sky and a line of soldiers pointing their rifles at the victims. What you should see here is how Romanticism is juxtaposed to the Enlightenment in the most negative terms, obviously. So the personification of the Enlightenment is this modern tool, which is the centipede of the French soldiers. You don't see the faces, they sort of merge into one creature, hence the centipede. They are armed with technology, with weapons, and they are pointing them at humanity, right? And you can see every face of the intended victim. So you have individuality versus sort of communal murderous technology. And the central figure is presented via the Christian iconography of martyrdom. He actually has stigmata on his hands. He's standing in this crucified sort of pose. He's dressed in white. He's the most lit. But he's not the hero. He is this sort of futile, it's a figure of a futile, continuous victimhood, hopelessness. This is not a Christian sacrifice, right, that leads to salvation. There is no salvation. The church is under the cover of darkness. There is no help coming. And this martyr is a sunburned laborer, an everyman, a sort of an individual who doesn't matter to the Enlightenment that turned evil. So what is anti-romantic in Goya is that he's incredibly, he's a virtuoso pictorially, both in his etchings and his paintings. But what is anti-romantic is that the brutality, the sort of the base violence of war and death is not softened by any pictorial sort of technique. So the last thing I'm going to show you by Goya is Saturn devouring his son. So this is right, it's close to his death, and he paints this on the walls of his house. It's actually a mural, which has been, we have, some art historian transferred that mural to a canvas that's now at the Prado in Madrid. But this is what he surrounded his living space in. So we don't really know what the message of this is, except horror. It could be youth versus old age. He is close to dying himself. This could be time as the universal devourer, which is what Saturn stands for. It could be the wrath of God, God abandoning humanity, or it could be Spain consuming its children in wars and revolutions. Okay, so this is Goya. Hold your questions or write them down. So the next artist I'm going to show you, so it all starts with Goya, really. And Goya is still sort of a transitionary figure between the old masters and the modern. Now, Theodore Géricault also has a very long name, Jean-Louis André Theodore Géricault. It dies very, very young, at 32, and he's born in Rouen. He is a son of a business owner. He moves to Paris. He's very talented. And he studies with a neoclassical artist who disapproves of what Géricault is trying to do. So he leaves the studio and he teaches himself. He goes to the Louvre, he copies there, he sketches live horses, he travels. You have to travel to Italy at this point if you want to sort of feel like you've completed your artistic education. And he also travels to England. He dies most likely from tuberculosis, but he really, really is an important figure. So he continues in this sort of vein of destabilizing the image of a hero, which is what neoclassicism is all about. So this is his first exhibited work. He executes it in just 12 days. So, which is incredible. This is the Charging Chasseur, circa 1812. Now, 1812 is when Napoleon invades the Russian Empire, and it doesn't go well. So what Géricault is responding to is to this painting on your right. This is David's, a neoclassical artist, Napoleon crossing the Alps, right? So this is a heroic Napoleonic army on your right, and this is the failing Napoleonic army on your left. And you can see what neoclassicism is all about and what Romanticism is all about. Hero versus anti-hero. So in Géricault, if you compare it to David, you have a very fuzzy, loose background in Géricault and a very crisp background in David. All of the crispness in Géricault is in the foreground, and you can see every tassel, every sort of adornment, right, on that glorious, opulent uniform of a Napoleonic soldier. He is dressed as though he is in a parade. He is dressed as a hero. But what you see, and it's a huge painting, the painting is 137 inches high. So you have this sort of triumphalism at first glance, and then you look at it more closely and you see that this is a painting of fear. This is a horse that's been spooked. This is a rider that's looking back with anxiety. His sword is down. And this is a very ineffectual sort of anti-hero. Géricault could have painted it because his father bought him out of the conscription. And what you see in this painting is an actual French officer who died in the Napoleonic War. So it could be the projection of sort of his own anxiety and fear, just like Goya's in the insane asylum. Now, the most scandalous and the most important painting by Géricault is this one. And again, it's ginormous. This is 23 feet, 6 inches long. It is absolutely overwhelming when you stand in front of it. And it is at the Louvre, and it sort of takes up a huge portion of the room. This is called the Raft of the Medusa. Medusa was a ship that capsized, that got wrecked on its way to Senegal. This was a widely publicized, widely embarrassing contemporary catastrophe. What you have in Jericho, unlike in Goya, you have the neoclassical bodies. You have these heroic, powerful, idealized bodies with the muscles and the gestures. But you have them cast in romantic, anti-heroic actions. So here you have this base human nature where the instinct of survival is primary over morality. So to know, the contemporary viewer would know all of this, but so there were only 6 boats on the ship, and 250 people, including the captain and the crew, boarded the boats, and they were supposed to tow the hastily constructed raft where you had 146 men and 1 woman. And even though they were supposed to tow the raft, they cut it loose. So these 147 people were starving, were dying of thirst, were committing suicide, were killing each other. There was cannibalism, and only 15 men out of 147 people survived. And they were saved by chance, by a passing ship. There was no state search. So this is where the surviving 15 had to, survive by all means necessary. There is no hero behavior on that raft. Now, Jericho is not showing us cannibalism. He's not showing us ugliness, really. He's showing us these beautiful neoclassical bodies. But the moment that he has chosen is when the moment that had happened is there's a ship on the horizon which will save them on the second try, sort of. But that ship missed them the first time. So the moment that we're seeing here is when all hope is lost. They're desperate to be saved. They're desperately waiting for the ship to notice them, and it doesn't. So this is what Romanticism is all about, the sort of the peak of depression, where that hope is snatched away from you. That is what Romanticism is all about. So in Jericho, you always have, and in a lot of romantics, you have this sort of basis on empirical observation and also individual invention, sort of making up of drama. So Jericho sketched the survivors. He actually met 3 of them. He included them in the raft. He went to the morgue and sketched the dying. He actually very weirdly brought some limbs home and kept a head in the studio and was sketching it. He stole it basically from the morgue. He made a model of the raft to scale. He sketched the storms, went to the coast and sketched the storms. So all of this is what? Empirical observation. But he also, in the raft, he added extra corpses. He added the storm, which wasn't there in reality. All of these starving, dying people have these enormous muscles and are very athletic. And the figures are twice the size of a human body. So that is, reality and invention, both together. Now, in terms of the composition, if you look at it closely, you'll see that there are two pyramids. So a pyramid is the most stable compositional device used since high Renaissance in Italy. When you have 2 intersecting pyramids, that's a Baroque device. And when you have intersecting lines, and you have a lot of diagonal lines here, that adds to the movement and that adds to the instability. And so we do feel like all of these bodies are rolling down towards us. We're going to be engulfed by the dead and by the waves, right? And they're also directional. So you have one direction towards this huge wave that's about to destroy this rickety raft. And so this is the direction of hopelessness one way, and also this direction up to this, the pinnacle of this pyramid is a dark-skinned man who's a Haitian model, who's waving to the ship that's barely seeing on the horizon. So again, what is this? Directional to another hopelessness. So from both ways, there is no hope in here. So it's also connected to, there's a very strong movement towards abolitionism. And so you have the most active, the most perceptive force in this painting is a Black man, the pinnacle here. Jericho also did the series of the insane, and he did it for a psychiatrist at the most famous mental institution in France called the Salpêtrière Hospital. So he worked with the doctor there. So to not bring the patients on stage as was traditional, which is completely undignified, the doctor wanted to preserve the dignity of his patients and commissioned the portraits. So each portrait was supposed to stand for a diagnosis. And that, of course, is completely not scientific. You can't diagnose monomania, which was a diagnosis, or envy by the way a person looks. But so it's a portrait, but it's also a medical conclusion that we're looking at here. So it is very definitely an individual. You can recognize this woman. There is a likeness that is preserved here. It's not generalized, it's not idealized, but it is very much dramatized. You have this very dark background, you have a very starkly lit face, you have this very expressive brushwork, right, that relays a lot of emotion, a lot of passion here. So you have the dignity of the mentally afflicted versus the demonically possessed ones, right? As we would see in Hogarth or even in Goya. There is much more dignity here than in the Goya's asylum. All right, next artist. I'm going very fast because we don't have a lot of time. Next artist is Eugène Delacroix, and he is born and dies in France. He has a very interesting personal sort of story. The beginnings are very interesting. So he's from a very well-established, very wealthy family. The father who raises him is Charles Delacroix, and he's a minister of foreign affairs of France. However, his biological father was the previous minister of foreign affairs, Talleyrand, a very famous minister. So, that's an interesting sort of thing here. So Charles dies, his father dies in 1805 when Delacroix is a child, and his mother dies in 1814. So he is a full orphan at 16, and he becomes a professional artist, and he starts with the neoclassicist, and he's very influenced by Rubens and Jericho. Jericho, who dies at 32, becomes this very, very impactful influence in France. He establishes himself as a painter of contemporary events. And you all know his most famous painting, Lady Liberty, his most influential work, but he also travels to England, he travels to Spain, he travels to North Africa after France conquers Algiers, and he becomes fascinated with this sort of primitive Orientalism, so harems, tigers, Arabian horses. That is also part of the Romantic movement. He's incredibly prolific. He produces about 9,140 works over his lifetime, and he dies at 65. So this is one of his works. There's a version at the Louvre, but there's also a version at the Philadelphia Museum of Art that you can go see. This is The Death of Sardanapalus, which is based on a play, and it's about, again, this sort of exotic sultan, right, who is on his bed covered in red silk, and his state has been conquered. You can see his city burning in the distance and the smoke billowing forward. So instead of surrendering, he orders his soldiers to kill his concubines, right, and to kill his horses, and then he kills himself. There is poisoned wine that's being brought here. So it is as anti-neoclassicism as you can get. It's all about chaos, chaotic, bright, wild colors, chaotic space, clutter, opulence, gold and red everywhere, passions running unbridled, right? Unbridled forces, murder, sex, nudity, and in the center, tying all of this together is this bright red silk bed that he's lying on. The anti-hero is the main protagonist, the evil sort of force. So it's all about movement, the brushwork, the color, the curving lines, the symmetry, the tilted balance. It's all about the destabilization, right? Chaotic movement, energy. That is what Romanticism is all about, passions. So this, you have seen this. You have seen this reproduced on candy boxes, on fridge magnets, on everything. So this is liberty leading the people, 1830. This is at the Louvre. And so this, in France, it becomes the marker, really, of the end of the Enlightenment and the start of the series of the revolution that will really shake France up. So this is about the 1830 July Revolution, and it dethrones one king, puts another king on the throne, and for a time they do keep it in the throne room to remind the king who brought him to power. So what are we seeing here? Again, part of it is based on empirical observation, part of it is pure invention. Lady Liberty is what? She is a goddess, which is why she is topless. But she is also leading the people that have been observed from reality. And all of the people that are behind her and the pedestal of corpses that she's standing on, all of these people are urban characters, the people that you could see in Paris. You have the street boy who is going to become, and Victor Hugo, he's going to become Gavroche, if you know the Yolemis. You have a bourgeois that you can recognize by the top hat. You have a student, you can recognize him by his bicorn. You have a worker, a proletarian in his cap. You have a sort of, you have a soldier over here, two soldiers, actually. We don't know who he is because he lost his pants and we only have the sock here. But the point is, the characters have been observed from life. The Parisian buildings have been observed from life. You have the French flags waving. And you also have this sort of vision of liberty that is leading the reality, right, into the breach. And of course, the Statue of Liberty is based on Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. Just wanted to show you the tiger by Delacroix. This is at the Met. There was a wonderful exhibition of Delacroix some time ago, 5 years ago, maybe more. So this is a young tiger playing with its mother. You can see that there he is, trying to get her tail. So he's influenced by Rubens, who paints lions and tigers, and hippopotami, I think. He goes to the botanical gardens, he goes to the zoo. So these are, again, tigers that observed from life, hired by the old masters, and also tigers that are sort of, that act as surrogates for human passions. He said, men are tigers and wolves, driven to destroy one another. So danger, passion, exoticism, that is what Romanticism is all about. Now, these are the modern history painters, right? Géricault, Delacroix, we have the origin of it all, which is Goya. And now we're going to talk about two romantic landscape artists, Joseph Mallard, William Turner, J.M.W. Turner, an Englishman, has, lives a lone life, a loner, famously didn't want to be counted in the British census in 1841 because he didn't feel like it. So he got into his boat and rowed into the Thames just so they would not count him. Really not a big people person, but lives to be 76. He is he's a son of a barber, and weirdly enough, his mother dies at the mental asylum. He doesn't paint asylums, but it's an interesting sort of tie. He starts out doing architectural sketches for architects. So he's very sort of technically brilliant. He studies to be a topographical draftsman. So this is his starting point. He is accepted into the Royal Academy of Art by Joshua Reynolds, who is the preeminent neoclassicist in Britain. Like Constable, discuss later the way that landscape painters work during this time. He paints in the winter, but he sketches in the summer. He travels in the summer, does sketches, and then he paints in the winter. He is praised for, and I quote, a noble attempt at lifting landscape art out of the tame insipidities. So landscape is not seen as a proper genre, really. It's seen in the hierarchy of genres down there at the bottom. Turner makes it into a heroic sort of genre. We're going to see this. He opens a gallery. He becomes a professor of perspective. He publishes a treatise on his landscape philosophy with 71 of his watercolors. And he dies of cholera. So this is what Turner looks like. This is what his landscape looks like. And he's a London guy, so he mostly paints Thames. So this is an actual contemporary catastrophe, just like in Jericho, that happened. The houses of lords and commons burned down on October 16th, 1834. This is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. You can look at it. This is oil and canvas. Turner witnessed the fire like, thousands and thousands of Londoners. He sketched this fire while it was happening. And what you can see here is the sublime of nature. Fire is nature. Fire is nature out of control. That, full of the fire brigades, it couldn't be stopped in London. And what Turner is a precursor of the Impressionism, because color in Turner replaces form. You can still recognize form within the color, but it is mostly about the joy of pigment. So there you have the sublime of nature, the sublime of the terrible nature. And here you have the sublime of death. And this is about the death of England's heroic past. So this is called the Fighting Temeraire, tugged to her last berth to be broken up, 1838. British titles usually have like 2 sentences in them. So what you have here is a warship from the legendary Battle of Trafalgar, a warship that fought Napoleon and won, and it has become useless because of the Industrial Revolution. And you can see that it's being towed by this little grimy tugboat that is steam powered. And this white, majestic ship looks like a ghost. And all of the ships around it are becalmed. They're all sailboats, and they're all at the mercy of nature. And the only thing that is moving is the sort of dirty little boat that is killing. So Turner is getting on in age as well. So he's looking back and he's sort of romanticizing. He's nostalgic about the past. So the industry is killing the heroic, navy here. And Turner's paintings are frequently accompanied by poetry, his own poetry. So this was accompanied by the flag which braved the battle and the breeze no longer owns her. You have to lower the flag, or you have to put the white flag when the ship goes out of service. Now, this is probably the most impactful painting by Turner and the most famous one. This is the slave ship slavers throwing overboard the dead and dying, typhoon coming on from 1840. And this is what? This is the sublime, just like in Jericho, the sublime of the base human nature, the loss of reason. So in Jericho, it is lost, morality is lost to survival. Here, morality is lost to greed. So this was a historic event in 1781. There was a trial of a slave ship captain because they got stuck because of the weather, because of the typhoons. The ship ran low on drinking water, and it is a slave ship, and the insurance would only pay up if the slaves died of non-natural causes, so not of thirst. They wouldn't pay up if they died of thirst. So the captain threw 132 people overboard. So the trial was not because of any anti-racial sentiment, but because the captain, was swindling, or the insurance company thought that the captain was swindling them, which he was. But this trial ultimately led to the abolitionism in England in 1807. And in general, the universal abolition was the political focus of England, because since England abolished slavery, it now was at the disadvantage to the economies that didn't abolish slavery. So this was very cynically sort of driven by economics. But in 1840, when this painting was exhibited, there were 2 anti-slavery conventions in London. And the Prince of Wales was a champion of anti-slavery. So this is all sort of organized together. So this is one side of the story. The other side of the story is, how do you represent this sublime, this horror? And the way that Turner does it is just like Jericho does it, through beauty, unlike Goya. So you can recognize objects, but it is mostly about this abstracted color, right? This wonderful typhoon sort of moving the ocean, blocking out the sun. You have the red and the orange bleeding into everything. If you really concentrate, you can see the hands poking out of the waves over here, and you can see the chains on them, and you can see the birds and the sharks circling the bodies in the water. But you have to concentrate to see it. Mostly we're looking at how the color, right? The color sort of moves through the painting. It is very disorienting. You don't know where you are as a viewer. It's about entropy, it's about chaos, it's about the sublime of both nature, capitalized, and nature, lowercase, right? The human nature and the typhoon, like none of which is controllable. And it is also about despair, right? About the futility of trying to enlighten humanity. Industrialized or not industrialized, it's all about greed and survival. So the last landscape painter I'm going to show you is well, sort of a contemporary of Turner. They do intersect at times. This is John Constable, and he, unlike Turner, who is a London guy, Constable is a country boy, and that is what he paints. He's a son of a wealthy corn merchant. He wants to become a professional landscape painter. And he even refuses the post of a drawing master at Sandhurst. Sandhurst is the most important military academy in England, so that would be a lucrative position. And the way, unlike Turner, who's all about drama and theatricality and these sort of excessive, sublime sort of colors, the way that Constable is a romantic is that he takes the nature of the British countryside, the most mundane sort of daily corner of Britain, and he blows it up and he paints it. He calls them his 6-footers. So he sort of looks outside of his window and he paints his backyard on 6 feet of canvas. He makes rural Britain heroic and monumental, and he makes a landscape into a history painting, just like Turner does, just in a very different stylistic way. So to him, and he says in his public lectures that landscape is both scientific and poetic, and art is imagination and reality, just like we've seen with the Romantics. He's very melancholic. It's all about the nostalgia. It's just like in the Fighting Temeraire of Turner. It's about the lost Arcadia. It's nostalgic past that's gone. It's the countryside of his childhood. And it's also, he's very, very reliant on scientific observation. And I'm going to show you examples here. So this is what has made him famous, this painting. And it's a 6-foot painting at the National Gallery in London. This is the Haywain, 1821. And it is exhibited with the title of Landscape Noon. The next movement that is going to exhibit landscapes, which denote time or denote seasons, are the Impressionists. So what Constable is doing here is he has taken this very traditional approach to painting nature, which is painting a cycle of nature, a season of nature, and he made it absolutely monumental. Nobody's painting like Constable at the time. At the time, or Turner, at the time, if you're painting British countryside or French countryside, you look at somebody like Claude Lorraine, and it's all sort of mid-brown tones. When Constable exhibits this painting, it is a scandal. It is rejected. There are no buyers. They say it's too green. They say it looks unfinished. It looks completely normal to us, but this is a sort of an explosion, really, in terms of landscape painting. However, Jericho sees it in London, and when he dies, this painting travels to Paris, and it is exhibited at the Salon, and it becomes the sort of the origin point for French modern landscape. This is where Impressionists are going to come from. Well, first the Barbizon school and then the Impressionists. They all absolutely lose their minds over Constable. It is green, it is fresh. They say it is truth to nature. And it is enormous, of course. So what you see here is not, you can travel actually to this place in England, and I think this little house is still there. There are tours there. I think it's cordoned off now from tourists from us. It is not the view that you would see. It is a composite. So that is the inventive part here. It's curated landscape. There is no poverty that Constable ever shows you. It's all very beautiful and idyllic and Arcadian here. But he is also advised by a botanist. So there's very specific, meticulous detailing, which is truth to nature. He sketches outside, but he finishes his painting in the studio. And he tries to get as close to the greens and the blues and to the observation of light as he can, and the clouds, but it is also an artificially constructed landscape. So my personal favorite in Constable are his studies of clouds, and he goes out and he paints clouds and he calls it skying, which I love as a verb. So what he does is he has a sort of a paint box, a smaller one, and it fits on his knee, and he puts a piece of paper there into the box and he sketches outside very rapidly. So all of these are oil on paper, a cloud study from 1822 and Rainstorm over the Sea, 1824-28. He probably just does it for the joy of it because he has never used the sketches in complete paintings. So we don't know why he does it. So I prefer to think he just does it for pleasure. Especially in the first painting, there is no human figure, which is unheard of. There's no humanity as a point of reference. It's about the changeable, expressive clouds, which is precisely what it all started with the Dutch, with the contemporaries of Vermeer, and it all is going to sort of explode with the Impressionism, but none of it is possible without Constable. He paints the first cloud study in an hour, and he is very meticulous. He understands the structure of the clouds and the movements of the clouds. And what somebody has done is, the British Observatory Meteorological archives are incredible. So they actually found on the day that Constable painted it, they could pinpoint these clouds. They actually found the contemporary weather report that read large towering cumulus clouds pregnant with rain. August 27th, 1822. This is how specific Constable is. And of course, he also marks his sketches on the back with the type of the cloud and the time and the date as well. And then the later painting, we're going to see something Gustave Courbet, the great French realist, which is the next great French stylistic movement, is going to do a version of what Constable does. These almost abstract sweeps of paint in the sea and the sky. And both of these sketches are romantic. There is no figure. It's the sublime of nature. If you're looking out at something, you're looking out at the sea and the sky. And if you have a human figure like you have in the last painting, it's this teeny tiny puny body that is not in control of anything. All right, so let me open this up to questions. You can unmute yourself or you can write into the chat, whichever way you prefer. Comments, suggestions. I mean, not suggestions. Comments, questions are welcome.
Irina, what followed Romanticism? I mean, it wasn't immediately followed by Impressionism, was it?
Realism. So Gustave Courbet is who followed Romanticism, which is another sort of swing of the pendulum, right? You go from neoclassical you go from rationality to emotion, and then realism is about rational sort of description of what you see around yourself. So Courbet and then Monet, Edouard Monet. Nobody has any questions at all?
Well, this is such an interesting time. You started out with all this death and people eating their children and getting shot and all that, and then you end up with beautiful nature and lovely clouds. It It doesn't seem like it's all the same movement, but I guess it is.
Well, it's happening concurrently. Goya is prior to that, but you have sort of, Jericho and Delacroix, Constable and Turner, they're all sort of contemporaries, more or less. It's just different genres. And then, of course, the Brits are not as interested in contemporary history as the French are, because the Brits are not going through dozens of revolutions as the French are at the moment. So they can paint nature, and the French want to paint the contemporary catastrophes. Okay. Anybody wants to write into the chat? Okay.
I checked. There we go.
Just thank you.
We got a thank you. Very interesting. That doesn't sound like a question, but I'm sure it's the way we all feel.
All right. Well, I guess I just explained everything. So from Goya to Constable, it's a very tumultuous time. A lot of emotions in, people running wild in reality and in art as well.
When I think about movements, everybody thinks about Impressionism, and it's very specific, different artists, but it's a specific time. And then post-Impressionism with Gauguin and Van Gogh and all those guys. When I think about Romanticism, I don't really think of it as a coherent group. I like I do Impressionism, etc., or abstracted expressionism, that kind of stuff.
Well, you're right, because I don't know if I don't remember if I think I mentioned it. So if you prize individuality over everything else, then you're going to prize individual styles over one common style. So there's a much more coherent style in Impressionism. We recognize Impressionism by the way that they paint, right? The broken color, the broken brushwork, right? The absence of black. There's a much more cohesive look to Impressionism. Romantics paint however they feel. So it is a much more sort of diverse group. Mary, did you have a question?
Yeah, you started out with the Romanticism beginning, you said in Germany with Goethe, and was there any kind of communication between the literature, those contemporary, say, writers, Goethe, Schiller, those writers in Germany, and with the pictorial artists? Were they associated together, or I just think of Goethe with the famous yellow vest for
Yes.
And I just wondered if there was symbolisms that came back and forth.
So Goethe very influenced Turner very much, especially with the yellow, the way that he describes how yellow is shaped, the color. I think you were referring to those. In Germany, you had sort of earlier groups like Fuseli. Do you know who he is? The nightmare. So this interest in the macabre, in the fantastic, the gothic, anything, right?
Right.
Then you had, what's his name, Friedrich,
right,
in Austria, I think. So you do have these. Because I'm constrained by time, I have to pick most famous ones.
Right.
But yes, so the interesting thing for me was when I was studying this, the way that we flipped our stereotypes about cultures. So Romanticism starts in Germany, and the Germans and Europeans in general see the Germans as this very emotional, poetic people.
Right.
And then they see, the Romans sort of, even Italy is more rational because of Renaissance.
Right.
We've completely flipped the script. We still have stereotypes, just the other way around. Holly had a question. The title Romanticism leaves one to believe something pleasant. It's interesting how you described so much despair. Yes, so romantic doesn't mean Valentine's Day. Romantic, the movement means passion.
Right.
Well, I guess it could tie into the Valentine's Day, but it's about the sublime. It's about the emotion, the nature, the world that is out of control. And so, as I hope I explained, so with the Enlightenment, they were sort of looking forward to the world that can be controlled, that can be governed by reason, that we can build this enlightened utopia. And then with the Romantic period, where you have the revolutions and the wars and just dead bodies all over Europe, that hope is done for. So the world is seen, by the artists included, as something that is out of control, that there are forces, like the sublime forces, that are beyond reason, including the forces inside ourselves. So yes, Romanticism is depressing. All right. Did I miss? All right. I don't have any questions in the chat. Yes, I do.
Well,
Okay.
not a question. I just want to, it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like there's a lot of questions coming from the group. I guess it's a shy group, plus you explain things so clearly. And thank you so much for joining us this evening and for doing it this year and for the last 9. And it's just wonderful. And we look forward to, I know, can you tell us a little bit about your classes over at Montgomery College?
Well, they start next week. I'm teaching 3 classes. Early Renaissance, so the birth of painting in Italy. Masaccio, Mantegna, Verrocchio, people like that. Botticelli. I'm teaching, so that's class 1. I'm teaching class on Velázquez. And we're going to spend the whole class on Las Meninas. And my 3rd class is on Paul Gauguin, which is my research focus. And I decided to put the class together. So 3 classes, 3 lectures, each class. And I think I still have spaces in some classes. And they're all in Rockville on campus, at Montgomery College. So thank you, Patrick, for letting me advertise myself.
Oh, that's the least I could do. Thank you again. I'm now going to end the recording. And thank you, members, for joining us.
Thank you.